Welcome to We Learn Virtual Learning Network. This is session number 24, Medieval's Religious Movement 1, Bhakti and Sufism. Topics which we are going to cover in this session are Introduction, the Bhakti tradition, Sufism, and the comparison between Sufism and Bhakti. So coming towards the introduction, we begin by introducing the structure of the unit and describing the background of the development of Bhakti and Sufism. We then go on to examine the Bhakti tradition, including the three parts of Bhakti and the two pillars of Bhakti. We then turn to Bhakti tradition in the south and then examine the Bhakti tradition in the north. In this session, we include the growth of medieval mysticism, Sufi Bhakti interaction, and Bhakti Sufi teachings. We therefore provide an adequate picture of the Bhakti and Sufi movements in the medieval times. So coming towards the Bhakti tradition. In medieval India, it was caste structure that governed the lives of men and the network of relation that they could enter into. The structure of social divisions that arose thus was, as mentioned, a grid, inflexible and unequal one, that created extreme of inequalities, privileges and disprivileges between men and social groups. Although this was an extremely unfair system, little could be done or said against it, as it was supposed by Hindu religious ideology, particularly the notions of high and pure birth and occupation as against the low and impure. In other words, Hinduism was both religious and social framework and governed the life of Hindus. To be a Hindu meant that one's life was governed by factors such as being born in a caste, being subject to one's action or karma to be the part of Brahman, and aim at achieving moksha or liberation of one's soul or salvation. Further, it must be remembered that Hinduism was not a revealed religion that had just a single text. With every phase in the development of Hinduism came new scriptures and texts. Thus, we have the Vedas, the Upanishad, the Purana, and the Bhagavad Gita. Next are the paths and pillars of Bhakti. Three major religious traditions of ancient India. These are the sacrificious cult of the invading Aryans and the recitation of the Brahmana priests that become the foundations of the Vedas. The practice of bodily mortification and group known as Sramans, probably contributing traditions of earlier inhabitants of India but soon adopted by some of the Aryans. And the pre-Aryan cult of spirit and village goddess inhabited trees and rocks and protected special people or special group. Those who worship Vishnu as a supreme deity are known as Vaishnavas. Likewise, those who accord the supreme place to Shiva are known as Saivas, and those who are devotee of the goddess of power are known as Saktas. Each sect is subdivided into lineage of teachers and teachings. The major form of bhakti are divided according to the various moods of the devotees. Raw emotions of the bhava is transformed into dharma to a refined mood or rasa. Each combination of bhava or rasa uses a particular human relationship or devotional stances such as servant to master or child to parent or friend to friend, parents to child and develop to lover. While bhakti stressed passionate attachment, it is an striking contrast with yoga, which stress detachment. Yet, many forms of bhakti do talk of detachment, such as that taught in the Bhagavad Gita. The bhakti movements stand rigorously between the extreme ascetic paths and popular Hindu religiosity. Bhakti generally shares the ascetic concern of moksha, release from finite existence and realization of transcendent beatitude. What is primary? A communism with the Lord. A few bhaktas made the total commitment of time and style of life characteristics of Hindu renouncers, spending whole days in chanting and singing the praise of their Lord. Bhakti shares with particular Hinduism the basic rituals of puja, worship of the deity in image form with fruit, flower, and vegetable, which are returned after medieval and modern worship as prasada, that is, material substance filled with the Lord's grace. Such puja may take place in home shrine or local temple. The worship could be for any spiritual or mundane purpose. There are of distinctive bhakti rituals, communal singing of hymns and chants, performance of dharmas, dance and chants, and ritual of heroic deeds of Vishnu. These three paths of bhakti that Lord Krishna offered to Arjuna were the path of knowledge or jnana, the path of action or karma, and the path of devotion or bhakti. The Sanskrit term bhakti is most often translated as devotion and bhakti marg as path of devotion. Bhakti is the divine human relationship as experienced from the human side. There are at least three major forms of bhakti, that is, Vaishnavas, Saivas, and worshippers of great power. The Bhakti tradition in South. The Krishna cult arose in South India around the 8th century. We now trace here the development of the Bhakti tradition in the South. The 8th century saw the rise in Tamil country of persons who called themselves as Alvars. Alvaras men who have intimate and intuitive knowledge of God. They claim to have an intensely personal relationship with God. They rejected the caste system by recurring saints to their moment from all divisions of society and refusing to use Sanskrit as a language, as it was Brahmanic in nature. Virashvism or Lingayatism was a protest movement that thought the method of bhakti and selfless abandonment, lashed out against the orthodox and polytheistic nature of Hinduism. It stressed the oneness not just of God and devotees as in the Krishna cult, but also of oneness of the devotee with the people. Thus, we have the famous legend about a saint called Ghantakma, who realized that the supremacy of Shiva as the sublime God offered his body to Shiva. This is the supreme sacrifice to offer oneself into a deity. The Bhakti tradition in North. From the south of India, we find that the Bhakti tradition spread to central and North India. Each added its own local traditional belief and devotional form of both the Vaishnava and Shiva Bhakti tradition. Thus, we find in central India, particularly in Marathi belt, Krishna Bhakti finding a strong hold. Its most famous saint here was Tukaram. he is his follower, worshipped Krishna in the form of Vitobha and Vithala. The main theme here was the seeking of liberation within oneself by becoming one or merging with the Lord. All of us are familiar with the bhakti of Mirabai. It is believed that such was the intensity of her devotion that Krishna absorbed her soul into his own. Finally, we have the significant role played in this period by Chaitanya. Chaitanya played a major role in establishment of Mathura as a bhakti center. He professed that the highest knowledge of all was the knowledge of devotion to Krishna, and greatest of sorrows was separation or viraha from Krishna. The bhakti movement reached further northeast from here and was carried to Assam in the 16th century, where the Meiteis, a local tribe, are Vaishnavites. Besides the Vaishnava tradition coming north, we also find the Shiva Bhakti tradition also found a foothold in North India, particularly in Kashmir. Its greatest follower and prophet was Abhinav Gupta, and later one of the Kashmiri women saint Lala. Although Shiva Bhakti found many followers here, they found the rendering of the tradition difficult to follow. Even so, their number did not diminish. The Shivaratri is one of the most celebrated occasions in Kashmir. Now, moving towards the Sufism. Having examined the basic techniques of bhakti and how it created a new path for devotion or religious worship, we now proceed to consider the influence of Islam on the Indian subcontinent and the consequences that it had for the bhakti tradition in particular. As an offshoot of this influence, we have the role of Sufi movement in India. Islam, as a world religion, confronted Hinduism in full force rather than getting absorbed into it. Historically, we find that the beginning of the 10th century were the Muslim invasion. This is the time when Muhammad of Ghazni invaded the Indian subcontinent 17 times. In the early 16th century, the Mughals invaded India. It was the later half of the 17th century that the Hindus launched a counter-offensive. It was particularly in the struggle of the Maratha king Shivaji that the moral power of Hinduism received imputes and the Bhakti tradition resurged as a response to the impact of Islam. The Indian tradition tried to find a response within its own spiritual condition, since the Muslim ruler discriminated against the Hindu who were their subjects. What is Sufism? Now let's discuss the meaning of Sufism. In the beginning of Sufism developed Mesopotamia, Arabia, Iran and modern Afghanistan. It was formalized by the end of 8th century. Right from the beginning, there was a hiatus between the Ilamas and the mystics. The latter claimed to be delving into the interior of religion, which depended on the heart. The Sufi and Bhakti tradition are characterized by adherence to religious text, governmental authority, and opposed to external ritualism of prayer. Ritu Diwan was pointed out that as a consequence of the 12th century Mongol invasion, many Sufis took shelter in India, especially in Multan, Punjab and Sindh. One of the greatest Sufi mystic, Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi, was very influenced by the Indian folklore and even wrote a poem dedicated to the flute of Krishna. He founded the Maulvi Sufi order in which music and dance were spiritual method. Swami Ji Maharaj, founder of the Radha Swami Sekhet, was much influenced by Rumi, who is often quoted in his discourse. Guru Nanak was called Guru of the Hindus and Pyre of the Muslims. By the end of the 16th century, the Bhakti movement had covered the entire North India, resulting in a intermingling of Hindu mysticism and Sufism. Kabir following verse illustrative this. The Musliman is accept the Tarif, the Hindus the Vedas and Puranas. But for me, the book of both religions are useless. Sufism can be explained through three basic religious attitudes of Islam, Iman, Ihsan. Islam is the attitude of submission of will of Allah. Imam designate a firm faith in the teaching of Islam, and Ihsan is to adore Allah through one may not see Him. The spread of Sufism in India. Sufism mainly followed into India from Arabia, Mesopotamia, and Iran. We have accounted of the various saints of different orders spreading Sufi teaching in different parts of India. To name a few, we have the well-known Sheikh Muainuddin Chishti, who had established himself in Ajmer, and Sheikh Nizamuddin Aulia, whose teachings and followers spread all over India. As far as the spread of Sufism in India is concerned, its character changed to adapt to the Hindu environment. The Sheikh, beside being a teacher, was regarded as a protector, friend, companion, and benefactor of Wali. The teacher was also believed to possess supernatural power of Karamah. The Sheikh or Peer was regarded as the spiritual guidance of the disciples or Murid. We find that most of the people who come to the Sufi scene desire to use their spiritual powers to cure an illness or fulfill a wish. Today, we find that of the many devotees who may visit the resting place of a Peer, that is, his dargah, come there to seek the fulfillment of a wish or a blessing. There were, as mentioned earlier, four main orders among the Sufis. Each of these we find different from the other in the emphasis of its teaching and the existence to which it spreads in India. All four orders, however, regarded as Sariya as a spiritual guide. All four believes that a Sufi should have no worldly professions. Each order had over time found devout disciples who in turn had reached the status of being capable of having their own disciplines and were known as Khalifans. These Khalifans played important role in the spread of their order teaching. Next is the comparison between Sufism and Bhakti. Having outlined what the tradition of Sufism entailed, let us now consider the role of Sufism in Bhakti tradition. As we know that what the Sufis taught was very similar to Bhakti teaching of concentrating upon a god and the significance of sacred music and song. This interaction between the two, it is believed to have led to the creation of a medieval mysticism which was independent of sectarian or orthodox practice and disclaimed particularly caste practice and atrocities. The first Sufi teacher who came into India was, as mentioned earlier, Khwaja Moinuddin Chishti, who arrived in Delhi in 1193 and settled in Pushkar in Ajmer. He had both Hindu and Muslim followers. We are all familiar with the Urus. At his dargah in Ajmer, to which folk of followers come, treating it as a major pilgrimage center even today. As mentioned, these Sufis were Islamic mystics who sought the path of salvation through an ardent and passionate love of God. The teachings of the Sufi greatly influenced not only followers but many saints of the Bhakti tradition who come to combine in themselves Sufi and Bhakti teachings, the two most important and the two most sufficient figures here from the 15th and 16th century were Kabir and Guru Nanak was there. Growth of medieval mysticism. An important role of the growth of medieval mysticism was played by Ramanandan, who himself was a follower of Ramanuja. Ramananda challenged caste division, questioned tradition ceremony, and accepted the Hindu philosophy of decisions, questioned tradition, ceremonies, and accepted the Hindu philosophy of jnana or knowledge, meditation or yoga, and devotion or bhakti. He had many disciplines, of which 12 were more important and come from low caste. It is believed that thought he earlier in his life abandoned the Muslim faith. He retained the strict monotheism of Islam and an aversion to the caste system. He saw religion as a personal concern and stressed relationship between men. God and his teacher or guru, he combined in him elements of both the Sufi and the Bhakti tradition, claiming that both Allah and Ram were the same thing. Since he was trying to reach out the common people, he used to dialect or its variant as a language of communication. He stressed the importance of both material and spiritual things in one's life. He had both Hindu and Muslim followers and was non sectarian. It is possible, however, that his Hindu followers are greater in number. Much of Kabir's life and work is derived from reconsulting its course from the Dohans and Shikhans rendered by himself. These were essentially rhymed poems set to music. There is much debate, however, about how many of these dohas were written by Kabir himself and how many of his followers of the Kabir Panthis. Sufi Bhakti interaction. This interaction of the Sufi and Bhakti tradition occurred to give to the lives of Kabir and Nanak and peculiar flavor. Kabir was linked to the Sufis not just in terms of the mythical nature of his rendering but also on the level of organization of thought. In the Khazinat Alasfia, the Gulam Sarwar Lohari, he finds that the Kabir is and related to the Chishtis. Scholars have argued in recent times that this, however, presents a chronological error. In these writings, he is believed to have visited many Sufi centers and is even believed to have debated with Sufi saints. None, however, denies the significant picture that his dohas had come to occur. Guru Nanak too, it is believed that encounters with Sufi teachers or sheikhs, of which a single encounter with the Sheikh Ibrahim of Pakpattam near Multan is considered authentic by scholars. Next is the Bhakti Sufi teaching. It is important to remember that the relationship between the Sufi and Bhakti saint was reciprocal, and the Sufi too were influenced by the Bhakti tradition. Thus, beside this major similarity in terms of the method of devotion and its experience, we find that the Sufi tradition also produced its saints such as the Sheikh Karim and Sheikh Inayat from the 19th century in the divine and Allah or Rama or Hari, similar to what Kabir sought to say and revealing the influence of the Bhakti tradition. The two reveal a major similarity in the nature of devotion and openness to all the sections of the society, which made both relative and near elation. The influence of Sufi through on the lives of Kabir and Nanak is seen very clearly. Guru Nanak on many of his journey is delivered to have wearing Sufi's problem. He found so sufficient was his attempt to bring the bhakti of Gurbani and Sufi teaching together. That when he died, his last rites were performed according to the custom of both the movement, Sufi and the Bhakti, and the two different religious structure mark his resting place. Now, in the last, there are a few questions which are based on this session. Question number 1 is, what are the basic teachings of human that the Bhakti tradition protested against? Question number 2 is, what are the main teachings of Sufism? That's all for We Learn. Thank you. Happy learning, we learning.